We begin today with the crisis at the U.S. Mexico border. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy is traveling to Texas today along with some of his GOP colleagues to assess the escalating situation. The trip comes as the Biden administration grapples with a surge in children arriving at the U.S. Mexico border without their parents. CBS News reports 4,200 unaccompanied minors are now being held at detention facilities run by U.S. Customs and Border Protection. President Biden has ordered FEMA to step in and help. CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang has the details.
These images from a few days ago show young migrants arriving to the southern border. Because of a lack of space at long-term shelters, due in part to COVID restrictions, thousands are being held in short-term facilities, according to government records reviewed by CBS News. Democrats blame the Trump administration.
What we are seeing today is the consequence of 4 years of dismantling every system in place to address this with humanity and compassion.
But after plummeting in 2020, the number of migrant children in U.S. custody has surged since January.
It's the Biden open border policies that are inviting even more illegal immigration.
President Biden's coordinator for the southern border seemed to acknowledge a change in the White House may have had an impact.
Surges tend to respond to hope, and there was a significant hope for a more humane policy after 4 years of pent-up demand.
Craig Fugate was the administrator of FEMA in the Obama administration. In 2014, he helped manage a similar surge of unaccompanied minors.
Is there anything more they could have done to be better prepared to handle the surge?
It was going to be one of the challenges we knew early on. What are the numbers? What's the intel look like? I think that's part of the reason why FEMA was asked to step in, is to help speed this process up, allow the agencies to get caught up with the children, and then build a system that would then be able to surge and move faster through the system.
So Weijia's joining us now with more on this. Weijia, break it down. Like, what will the role of FEMA be? What will they be doing?
So typically when we think of FEMA here domestically, it's, when there's a natural disaster, a hurricane, a snowstorm, and they, dive into the area and provide immediate relief. And that's exactly what they're going to be doing for these children, providing food, water, basic medical care, in addition to setting up more long-term shelters, because that is the real issue right now, is that when these children arrive here, they are held in short-term holding facilities. And by law, they're only supposed to stay there for a maximum of 72 hours before they are either released to their family members or transferred to an HHS facility that is equipped for longer-term care. And right now, the bed space in those places are just full because a couple reasons. One, there are COVID restrictions, and so there are fewer beds available because they have to be spaced out. And number two, because the number of migrants continues to grow every single day. And so the scramble is to set up more of those facilities so these children don't have to be held in these short-term areas that are really meant in many cases to be for detained adults at the border. And so lawyers for some of these migrants tell CBS News that the children are being held for up to 7 days in some cases, that when they interviewed the kids, they said they were hungry and they didn't even get to go outside to see the sun. And so that's why there is such an urgency to find a place for these children so they don't have to live in those conditions.
So, Weijia, as you know, appearing on ABC News this week yesterday, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said what we're seeing at the border right now is the result of the Trump administration's immigration policies. Let me play a bit of what she had to say.
This is a humanitarian challenge to all of us. What the administration has inherited is a broken system at the border, and they are working to correct that in the children's interest. I'm so pleased that the president, as a temporary measure, has sent FEMA to the border in order to help facilitate the children.
So, Weijia, Republicans feel differently. They believe that it it's President Biden that's to blame for this situation. So let's step back from the politics a bit and try to understand or try to make sense for our viewers. The situation at the border, what was it like when President Trump implemented some of his measures, some of his policies, and what has changed since President Biden first put his hand on the Bible?
So essentially, under the Trump administration, the border was all but sealed off, even to children. And that message was loud and clear, that if you came here, even if you were seeking asylum as a refugee, you would have to wait somewhere else. You'd have to wait in Mexico for your case to be processed. And so there were fewer migrants that came here, even though there was a surge in April 2020. Eventually, those numbers dwindled because, again, the former president made so clear that, he wasn't going to treat this like a humanitarian crisis and therefore would not take care of these migrants, regardless of their age, if they came to the border. And so that has changed under the Biden administration. The White House has made very clear that there will not be a cap on the number of young migrants that they take care of at the border and allowed to come into the U.S. Because that is, they say, the human thing to do. And so that's why, instead of turning them away, they are trying desperately to find a way to care for them and to provide what they need as they wait for their cases. And so, we spoke with the administrator of FEMA back under the Obama administration. You saw that in our piece, Craig Fugate, and he says the problem right now is the space, is just finding the physical space for these kids. And he said, it doesn't matter what your policy is or your politics. The fact is, we're not going to turn away the kids, which is exactly what happened under President Obama. And so, these officials, they have experience dealing with this. But again, it's not something they can turn on and off with a light switch. So it is going to take time. And, that's why it's such, a worrisome situation, because the time is one thing. But the other part of this is that the migrants feel a new sense of hope. And so they are heading here. And that's something that even the coordinator of the southern border acknowledged, that, yes, there is a new administration. There is an awareness that we have a different policy, and that may be contributing to the surge.
I want to ask you about something else, Weijia. This COVID relief package that was passed, President Biden and Vice President Harris traveling across the country, taking the show on the road to promote the benefits of this nearly $2 trillion package. It's already a pretty popular package, at least amongst voters. So why are they doing this? And give us an example of, their outreach efforts.
So President Biden was very clear about this. He didn't hide it when he said that, under President Obama, when he was vice president, he felt that there wasn't enough publicity around the relief efforts, the economic efforts that administration provided to the American people, and it ultimately hurt them when the midterms came around. And so, that's why this is essentially a victory tour, but it's also a way for them to explain exactly to people at home how this is going to help them. So, for example, President Biden is set to make formal remarks today. We also know that he will be hitting the road to Pennsylvania and then to Atlanta, Georgia later this week, where he will meet up with the vice president, who is already on her way out west with the second gentleman to also promote this plan, just to make clear to people the implementation process, what to expect, how the money will be spent. So there is no, gray area about what this means for people at home who are really desperate to get some economic help, in addition to help dealing with the virus, because, of course, a big part of this is vaccinations and testing supplies, making sure the funding is there for that. So, we're seeing a lot of different administration officials out there basically taking a tour. It's called the Help is Here tour, to let people know that, in fact, this is a new chapter for the country.
Weijia, let me also just ask you a follow-up on that. The President Biden, as you've mentioned, is set to take this selling of the COVID relief bill across the country. He's also meant to speak to a number of local reporters as he embarks on this trip. We know the Vice President will also do so. And the President does have a big interview scheduled this week, I believe with ABC. But there's been some criticism that he hasn't actually stood in the White House press briefing room to answer questions from reporters since being inaugurated. So just contrast that. It's interesting to me. It seems like a lot of people that are asking for this tend to be reporters and tend to be sort of the blue checkmark Twitter crowd. I don't know that the people that are waiting for their COVID relief check care so much, given that Jen Psaki is available every single day to answer questions from the press and other members of the administration. But just for people to understand, how important is it for the President of the United States, so at this point, into his presidency, to answer questions from reporters, and why hasn't he taken the opportunity to do so?
Well, the White House says it's because he is frankly too busy doing real work to pass the American Rescue Plan, for example, to work on other parts of his agenda. And they also say he takes questions very frequently from reporters when we are in the Oval Office, for example, when he has other events. But it's different, right? Because a lot of times in that environment, the president can't even hear our questions. So reporters shout them out, but he'll even say, I'm sorry, I can't hear you, and therefore I can't answer you. Now, to be fair, he has answered some of them, but it is very different when he is front and center, when he is at an event, and when reporters have the chance to ask him formal questions and follow-up questions. And to be clear, this is not for us. It is for the American people to have any questions that they have answered. But, you hear from many of those people who say, we don't need to hear from President Biden because we are seeing action. We are seeing money being deposited in our bank accounts. We are seeing we have more access to vaccines and testing. And so, they are okay with the White House press secretary serving as the voice representing the president. On the other hand, there are others who feel that, he should have to take some tough questions from the media, which he didn't, by the way, during the campaign either. In fact, they were notorious for not holding many public events for him to do that. And, one of the reasons is sometimes the president delivers messages that are not the same as what we hear from his officials. And he sometimes, contradicts them. For example, he openly contradicted the press secretary when it came to opening schools. And, she said that the goal was to open them one day a week in person. And then during a very publicized town hall, he said actually the goal is 5 days a week. And so that's very different, and they had to clean that up. So, there is no simple question or simple answer to your question, Vlad, but certainly as a White House reporter, we want to hear from the president to have that opportunity to ask him questions.
Weijia, before I let you go, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin arrived in Japan today. Secretary of State Tony Blinken is expected to travel to South Korea this week. What are their hopes for these Asia trips in terms of U.S. relations with various Asian countries?
Well, the two also penned an op-ed together in the Washington Post where they sort of laid out their vision and their goals very clearly, and that is to reestablish these critical alliances, especially with South Korea and Japan, which were frayed a bit under the Trump administration. As we've talked about before, the former president, adopted an America First mentality with regard to foreign policy, and, these two leaders made very clear that we cannot stand alone, that we need our allies, especially in that region with looming threats from China and North Korea. And so they want to reestablish, sort of hit reset on that relationship and continue to build those because, President Biden's position has been very clear that he thinks, America is strongest when it works alongside these very critical allies, not only in that region, but around the world.
All right, Weijia Jiang for us at the White House. As always, Weijia, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure, thanks.